Travis Scott's Utopia may have been one of the most successful albums of the decade, but did you know that originally the album was going to be completely different, even delving into the depths of psychedelic rock? But we will never get to hear Travis's original ideas for Utopia. Before we dive into what the album was going to sound like, let me show you all the evidence for the lost album actually existing. Utopia was originally announced all the way back in the summer of 2020, which is a whole 3 years before the actual release of the album. It's obvious that there wasn't meant to be a 5-year hiatus between Astroworld and the newest album, and there's a few reasons for this. Number 1, Travis has never left such a big gap in between his albums. Since 2015, he has dropped some kind of project each year, whether that be a solo or a collab album. 2, the artist was arguably at the peak of his career in 2020, with both the Fortnite concert and McDonald's collaboration coming in that year. 3, there's several topics that Travis could only rap about if he recorded the songs recently, but mainly for number 4, why would you announce an album if you don't plan to drop it for another 3 years? Utopia was obviously delayed to the Astroworld tragedy, which we will get into later, but no one expected Travis to do a complete U-turn on what the album would sound like. But what exactly did Travis originally envision for Utopia? Mainly, Travis had planned to delve into a completely new genre, stating in an interview that he was in album mode where it's like psychedelic rock. He further expanded on this, claiming he was developing a whole new sound and even banging his head against the wall trying to figure it out. What further suggests the style of Utopia being more of a psychedelic rock theme was the lineup for the Astroworld festival. Travis had featured names like Tame Impala and Yves Tumor, both of whom are artists who created the style of music that Travis wanted to recreate for Utopia. In fact, the festival as a whole had an extremely trippy feel to it, with all the promotion and sets being designed a certain way to promote the theme that Travis was going for. The definition of Utopia is an imagined place or state of things in which everything is perfect, and whilst Travis had an explanation for the current album, it just doesn't really live up to what was teased, which was people's main complaint about the project. I mentioned that the Astroworld lineup featured an artist called Yves Tumor. Well, an inside actually stated that back in 2020, the album was being executively produced by both him and Kanye West, which, if you have listened to Tumor's music, you'd know that the style aligned with what Travis said Utopia would actually sound like. Whilst we still got a bit of the aesthetic with the merchandise, the album didn't really align with it. Apart from a few songs, the music wasn't overly experimental in my opinion, and certainly nothing like what Travis had previously stated Utopia would sound like. It was actually more like Travis's take on Yeezus, with several of the songs sounding, and in some cases actually being Kanye's songs. But it wasn't just the sound of the album that changed. The features on Utopia also ended up being completely different to what was teased previously. When the original Utopia was being teased, it seemed that Travis gave chains to artists that were supposed to be features on the album. Roddy Ricch, Young Thug, Don Toliver, Gunna, and 21 Savage were all pictured wearing the Utopia chain, but only 2 out of the 5 had a place on the album. Which makes complete sense, as Roddy Ricch being on the biggest album of the year just doesn't make sense anymore. There was some remnants of the old Utopia within the album though, with songs like Lost Forever being teased since 2021, which certainly fits in with the direction that Travis was taking with Utopia, especially if you consider the lyricism, which talks about Travis being lost in a utopia. It's almost certain that other songs survived the change and have stayed on the album since 2020, especially since some of the features on songs are the same as what was teased back then, with 21 Savage playing a big part in the album alongside a decent sized verse from Young Thug. In fact, both Schizo and Till Further Notice sound like they belonged on the original album. But why did the album have a complete change in direction? The most obvious explanation is because of the Astroworld Festival incident, in which 10 people passed away as a result of being crushed. This would have a huge impact on any artist, even if it was ultimately ruled an accident. Travis received a lot of backlash for what occurred at his festival, with people claiming that it was his fault and past tweets being brought back up, which painted Travis in an extremely bad manner. The negativity would also affect the artists that are willing to be associated with Travis Scott. Perhaps people that Travis wanted to collaborate with, like Tame Impala, no longer wanted to be featured as a result of the bad press. There was no way the artist could release an album so soon after an event that could have destroyed his career, which does explain the 5-year gap in between albums, but it doesn't quite explain the change in style. Perhaps Travis didn't want to experiment too much with his first album in such a long time. He may have opted to stick to a sound he was more comfortable with, instead of pushing the boat out completely with a psychedelic rock album. If he'd had both the tragedy and an album that didn't live up to people's expectations, his career would have taken a serious hit, which explains the album mostly sounding like the traditional style of Travis Scott. I wonder if Travis had stuck with the original Utopia sound, would he have finally received the Grammy he's been working so hard for? Let me know what you think in the comments below. But as for someone who experiments with every album, make sure to check out my previous video highlighting the sins of Playboi Carti and the Opium label.